So this webinar series is part of a lifelong learning initiative created by Dean Lay to deliver relevant research and industry topics to our constituency. 4 RBS departments proudly collaborate to bring you the virtual Lunch and Learn series: Executive Education, Alumni and Corporate Engagement, Development, and Communications. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter. I'd like to thank Stan Phelps for joining us today. Stan is a TEDx speaker, Forbes contributor, and IBM futurist. He's the founder of purplegoldfish.com, a think tank that inspires leaders to think differently about their most important stakeholders, their employees and customers. Before founding purplegoldfish.com, Stan held leadership positions at IMG, Adidas, the PGA of America, and Synergy. He's also the Amazon bestselling author of The Purple Goldfish, as well as 4 other books. Stan teaches in the Rutgers Mini MBA Customer-Centric Management program, always receiving stellar feedback from participants. We're confident that you too will enjoy learning from him. And with that, Stan, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Margaret, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for taking the next 50 or so minutes with me. I want to start off, we're going to talk about this idea of being customer-centric, but I first want to tell you the story of Brandon Cook. This picture was taken a number of summers ago when Brandon was visiting his grandmother in the hospital. And unfortunately, his grandmother had pancreatic cancer, which I didn't realize, but it's one of the worst forms of cancer that you can get. And she literally was suffering to the point where she could just no longer eat. And here is Brandon pleading with his grandmother. He says, please have something to eat. And finally, Brandon's grandmother looks at him and says, Brandon, she says, I actually would like some. She says, I'd really like some soup. But she said, not the crap they serve here at the hospital. She said, what I really would like is a bread bowl of clam chowder. Now, they happen to be in New Hampshire. I tell people when I speak all around the country, if you don't live in San Francisco, where's the only place that you can get a bread bowl of clam chowder? And for most of us, if we want a bread bowl of clam chowder, we have to go to Panera. And so this happened to be a summertime like today. It was actually a Monday. It turns out that during the summer, Panera only serves clam chowder on Fridays. But Brandon, being the millennial he is, he simply reaches into his pocket, pulls out his phone, and within 1 minute, he's speaking to the manager at the Panera in Nashua, New Hampshire. Now, he explains the situation to Sue, and immediately Sue says, Brandon, stop. She says, come on down. Myself and the team would be more than happy to help you and your grandmother out. So he drives the 10 minutes. He meets Sue and the team. They end up giving Brandon a couple of bread bowls of clam chowder for he and his grandmother. In fact, they're so thoughtful, they actually throw in a little bit of cookies as a little something extra. And as Brandon tells the story, he went back to the hospital and he just had a wonderful lunch with his grandmother. For that short time, it made her happy. It kind of sustained her. And as he writes about it, he was driving home that afternoon and he was thinking to himself, that was just a little thing that Panera did. But it meant so much to both him and his grandmother that he decided that when he got home, he was going to write about the experience. Now, I always like to ask this question: how do we know that Brandon Cook is a good kid? Like, how do we know? Well, he's not only just visiting his grandmother, he went out of his way to do something special for He's got to be a good kid. Well, we know 100% for sure that he's a good kid, and it's because of this. He's friends with his mom on Facebook, right? And so he writes about the experience on Facebook. His mom, Gail, sees it. She's so moved by the story that she copies that post and she places it here. This is Panera's Facebook page. And when she posted it here, something pretty magical happened. Because just 2 weeks later, when someone pointed out this post to me, and I immediately liked the post after reading it, I was the 810,801st person, to like this post. This post got nearly 36,000 comments, many of which came from Panera's own employees that said, this is a reason why I work here at Panera. Why did this move so many people? Imagine running a campaign that got nearly 1 million likes on Facebook. Why did this move so many people? Well, I tell people I'd like to think that if I was the manager at Panera and I got the phone call, that I would have been thoughtful enough to do the little extra for Brandon. Maybe even been thoughtful enough to do the cookies. But I tell people this, I'm a customer. Every week I have dozens of interactions with companies that I deal with. What we may see here is common sense, but it's definitely not what? It's definitely not common practice. So when we talk about this idea of customer centricity, I want to share this example because I think there's a very basic reason that or understanding that we have to understand about how we react as customers and how our brain has developed to deal when we see situations like this. So my wife likes to call this my Homer sapien brain. But as human beings, we are programmed and hardwired to respond in certain ways. And it goes all the way back to our evolution. When we walked out of the cave, we would have to make very quick judgments of the people or things that we encountered. And it turns out that 80% of our judgments about other people happen in a split second and come down to just two factors that are at the heart of customer centricity. And if you break them down, those two factors are, or the two questions we have to ask is, one, what is the intent of this person that I'm interacting with? And then very quickly, number two, what's their ability to carry out that intent? So what's their intent and what's their ability to carry it out? And social psychologists said it's essentially two things. One is warmth, that's the intent piece. And then over here on the x-axis, you have competence, the ability to carry it forth. And here's the thing, we look at, through the experiences that we have, we look at the brands that we interact with through these same exact two ways. In fact, over 50% of how we judge brands come down to just these two factors. So let's do this. Let's look at these four companies and see where they fall on the matrix. Here's the thing, you can be seen as high warmth or low warmth. And then over here on the x-axis, you can be seen as low competence or high competence. So if I said to you BP, where would you put BP? Which quadrant on this matrix would BP fit into? Well, I would think most people would look at BP in light of Deepwater Horizon and say that they are low warmth and low competence. And here's the thing, how do we feel when we interact with companies and brands that show that they don't have the right intention and aren't very good at what they do? It's not a good feeling. In fact, a sense of anger or disgust. So much so that we might go out of our way to tell other people that they shouldn't do business with this brand. I always like to ask people, does anyone want to put their cable company, right over here? How about the U.S. Postal Service? U.S. Postal Service. They actually have been in the news over the last couple of weeks. But where would you put the USPS? Some people would say right next to BP, but let me make my case for my mailman. His name is Joe. And literally every day for my first 5 years in my house before he retired, every day when he would pull up in his Jeep, he would have a dog biscuit for my dog, McMurphy. When you saw Joe, he had a smile that would just light up a room. He was amazing. But I tell people, if I needed to get a package to LA tomorrow, is there any chance I'm going to be walking into the post office? And I'd say probably not. So you could make the case that for the most part, they try hard, they have the right intent, but in terms of the ability to carry it out, they might lack a little bit of below competence. And how do we feel about brands that have the right intention? Well, we might take a sense of pity on them, like we're rooting for them to do better and get out of their own way. Now, how about a brand like Rolex? Where would you put Rolex on this matrix? Now, they make probably one of the best timepieces in the world, so I would say highly competent. But here's the thing, they're a little bit exclusive, right? They're not probably, unless you're a Rolex customer yourself, they're probably not the warmest of brands. So I think you can make the case that they're down here in the bottom right. And here's the thing, if you're extremely competent but not warm, you can actually do well. But how are people going to feel? You might engender a sense of envy or jealousy for the folks that you deal with. Now, there's only one box left, but what did Panera show in this situation with Brandon Cook and doing that little extra for Brandon and his grandmother? They showed that they were both high warmth and high competence. Now, this is key. If you're an organization that exudes both the right intention and you're good at what you do, the feeling that you're going to get is a sense of pride, a sense of belonging for the customers that you deal with. That customer centricity is going to create a sense of pride, but more importantly, your customers will go out of their way to tell other people about their experience and tell other people that they should also do business with you to generate those needed referrals. Now, here's the thing, I think great brands aspire to be in this top right where Panera is, and they realize that it's not just a matter of generating awareness, it's about creating that customer, right? And getting to the heart of the customers that you serve. Now, here's the thing, the journey from the brain to the heart, it's not a long journey. In fact, the journey from the stem of your brain to the top of your heart is merely this, it's 9 inches. And these 9 inches apply to everyone who's listening to this right now. Those 9 inches are also the distance between your thumb and your pinky. So the distance between the stem of your brain and the top of your heart is exactly the distance between your thumb and your pinky. So try that if you've got a ruler at home. And again, this is about being customer-centric. Great brands lie here for the customers that they serve. Now, I'm such a big believer in this concept of 9-inch marketing. This is my license plate here in North Carolina. You literally can get the inch mark, which is kind of a cool thing here in North Carolina. And it's going to lead us to one of our 3 takeaways about being customer-centric, is that little things can truly make the biggest difference when we think about being more customer-centric and elevating the customer experience. So you're saying, well, Stan, come on, little things can't really drive the needle. Well, let me share an example of one that will probably floor you. And I'm going to go back to, this is an example relating to a QSR, so a fast food restaurant, quick serve restaurant. And a number of years ago, they wanted to test the impact of doing some little things. And so the 2 little things that they determined were the power of a gift or a greeting. So the idea is if you gave a customer a little gift when they entered the restaurant, and also if you warmly greeted them, what would the effect be? And so in the experiment, they created 4 groups, right? And the first, here's the gift. They either got a keychain or a little small sample of yogurt. And then again, the greeting was just somebody at the front door that was greeting you. So again, 4 groups. Here are the 4 groups. The first was what? The control group. So for the customers as part of the control group, they got no greeting and no gift. In the second group, it was what called the greeting group. They were greeted when they walked in, but they didn't receive any gift. The third group got the gift, but no greeting. And lastly, the fourth group got both the greeting and the gift. And again, what they wanted to be able to measure is the impact on how much somebody bought and what was their overall satisfaction. And so on average, the ones that didn't get a greeting or a gift, on average, they would buy $7.11 worth of food. For those that got a greeting when they walked through the door, on average, they bought $8.39 worth of food. If you were in the third group and you got the gift, but you didn't get greeted, they would buy $9.39. And lastly, if you got both the greeting and the gift, on average, you purchased $10.41. If you got both the greeting and the gift. Now, here's the thing. People are buying food. In some cases, you're giving them a yogurt, right? Wouldn't that make them actually purchase less food? No, I'm no math whiz, but the difference between $7.11 and $10.41 is 46%, with a small greeting and a small gift. So can little things like a greeting or a gift elevate the experience and satisfaction as well as drive higher purchase? Absolutely. Now here's the thing, it really is speaking to the importance of the customer experience. And here's the thing, Gartner has been doing studies for a number of years. Just last year, they asked companies, what's the main thing that you're going to compete on going forward? And literally 9 out of 10 companies said, hey, the experience that we provide is the thing that's going to differentiate us. That's how we're going to compete. What's amazing to me, you only have to go back 8 years ago to 2012 when they asked that same question. And back then, only 36% of respondents thought that the experience was the most important thing. That gives you an idea of how much more important it is going forward. Now, I want to share a story of which kind of led me on this journey of looking for companies that did the little things. And it relates to 11 years ago, I had what I call a moment of truth. I was working as an agency guy in the metropolitan New York area. I happened to be in New York for a meeting. I was at one of these rooftop bars in Manhattan, you know, a place where a bottle of beer costs $15. And I was with a colleague. We were about to go to a networking event. We were meeting a couple of people. And as we were sitting there, I noticed that there was an older gentleman sitting across from me. He was by himself. And I could tell that he was waiting for someone, because every few minutes he would look around the room as if he was looking for someone to come. And a half an hour passes and no one shows up for this guy. So I start feeling bad for him. So I lean in just to start conversation and be friendly. And I say to him, I said, excuse me, I said, do you know we spend 10% of our life waiting? We spend 10% of our life waiting. And we started to, and by the way, I know that's true because I once read it on the internet. So it has to be true. We started talking about being on time and the etiquette of waiting. And I stressed the importance of being on time. And this guy said something to me that changed the direction of my life. He looked me in the eye and he said, on time, he said, no one in life is ever on time. And I said, wait a second, I've been on time before. I said, not often. And I'll never forget it. He stuck his finger in my face and he gave me the Dikembe finger wave. And he said, no, no, no. He said, in fact, he said, on time is a myth. He said, no one in life is ever just on time. He said, people in life are either early or he said they're late. He said, no one is ever just on time. And I remember taking the train home to Connecticut that night, and I thought to myself, for the customers that we already serve, that same reasoning applies. That no one ever just simply meets the expectations of a customer or a client that you serve, right? You either exceed those expectations or you fall short. And so given the choice of either consciously doing more or doing less, I started on a journey of looking for companies that did more. And I'll never forget it, it's just over a decade ago. At the time, Zappos had just got purchased from Amazon for $1 billion. And Tony Hsieh and the team did something that people thought was impossible, selling footwear online. And Zappos, now here's the thing, what amazed me is that Zappos didn't build their brand through traditional marketing and advertising. They did it through the experience that they provided. But I thought to myself, there's got to be more companies beyond Zappos that are doing this. So I ended up starting a crowdsourcing project called the Purple Goldfish Project. And I went on a quest to find 1,001 examples of companies that consciously did the little something extra to go above and beyond. Now, called these little things a purple goldfish, that's obviously a metaphor. Really quickly, why a goldfish? Well, the goldfish was inspired by this company right here, Kimpton. So the Kimpton chain of hotels, if you've ever stayed at a Kimpton, they absolutely get the guest experience. They do a lot of little things, from gourmet coffee always in the lobby for free. They do wine tasting in the afternoon. They're pet friendly. But here's the one I love. If you were staying at some of the Kimpton properties, maybe you're missing your family pet. Some of the Kimptons would give you a pet goldfish for your stay. Program that they called Guppy Love. And I love it as a small little thing that they would do, that would be a memorable thing that would be talkable, that people would share about their Kimpton experience. Now, the goldfish is also very kind of personal to me, because my very first pet was a goldfish. So this is me when I was 6 years old. I'll never forget it. I went to like a carnival. I threw the ping pong ball, and I came home with my very first pet. His name was Oscar. And here's the thing, come to find out that Oscar wasn't very big, and it turns out that the average goldfish only gets to be 3 inches in length. Now again, if that is 9 inches, the average person's thumb is exactly 3 inches. So that's the size of an average goldfish. But if you had to guess what the world's largest goldfish is, how many inches would you guess? Now, we're not talking about a carp or a koi, an average ordinary goldfish. What's the world's largest? You're looking at it right here. Nearly 20 inches. And 2 summers ago, I did a program at Guinness, so I know it's true, at Guinness World Records. So I verified it. It's from the Netherlands. Everything is bigger in the Netherlands. But think about that for a second. How is that even possible that this is average and this is 20 inches? 20 inches is the size of an average domesticated house cat. Well, it turns out for a goldfish that their growth is impacted by 5 factors. And those same 5 factors apply to everyone's business that's on this call right now, that's listening in right now. The same 5 reasons why a goldfish grows is the same 5 reasons that your business grows. So let's do this. We're going to break down the 5 things really quick. Most people have heard the first one, right? The growth of that goldfish is, or the goldfish is determined by the size of the bowl and the pond that they're in. So the bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more the goldfish can grow. So what's the size of the bowl if you're in business? It's simply this. It is the market. And it makes sense. The bigger the market that you serve, the bigger you can grow, the bigger you can get. Now, the second reason for a goldfish is that their growth is also impacted by who? The other goldfish that are in the bowl or the pond. Now, unlike the first one, this is an inverse relationship. The less goldfish in that bowl or pond, the more the goldfish typically grows. So this is a no-brainer. Who are the other goldfish for your business? It's your competition, right? And it makes sense. The more competition you have, the harder it's going to be to expand and grow. Here's number 3, and it's so apt to where we're at right now. For a goldfish, their growth is also impacted by the surrounding, so the quality of the water that they're in. So the more nutrients in the water, the less cloudiness of the water, the more they typically grow. Now for your business, I want you to think kind of macro, like think more macro outside of your business. What's the quality of that surrounding? And it's simply this, and it's so apt to where we're at now, it is the economy. And we're in the midst of a global pandemic right now, right? So the ability to access capital, people's willingness to purchase, consumer confidence, those are all that surrounding factors, those macro factors that will impact your growth. Here's number 4, how that goldfish does in its first 4 months of life, its first 120 days, will determine ultimately how big it can get. So the better it does in those critical first 4 months, the more it will typically grow in the long term. Now, what's in business, what do you call your first 4 months? Well, you're simply a startup, or if you've launched a new product or service, how that new product or service does in those 4 months will determine how well it will ultimately do. Here's number 5. Number 5 is genetic makeup. So for a goldfish, what are they born with that separates them from all of the other goldfish? And the stronger their genes are and the more that they're separated, typically the bigger they get. How about for you in business? What's genetic makeup? What's that separation? And it's simply this, it's the extent to which you are different, how you differentiate what you do. How do you stand out in what I would call a sea of sameness? And here's the thing, we're living in an age of equality, so most people's products and services are not all that different from your competition. But how you stand out is your ability of not what you do, but more of how you do it. How do you deliver that experience around that product or service? Now, here's the thing, there's 5 things we talked about, right? The market, competition, the economy, first 120 days, and differentiation. And here's the question, of these 5 things, what do you have control over? And I'm going to assume most of the people on this call have been with a company that's been around for more than 4 months, so you can throw that out. But do you have control over the market, your competition? Heck, does anyone have control over the economy? Right? The only thing that you have control over is how you differentiate what you do, and that's through the experience. So that's the goldfish. The goldfish is simply a metaphor for growth via differentiation. How do you stand out? Now, why purple? So purple, the first of now 10 different colors in the series, but purple is an ode to this iconic American city. What city am I talking about? Talking about New Orleans. And specifically, purple is an ode to its most famous event, and this is Bourbon Street. We're talking about Mardi Gras. Purple's one of 3 official colors of Mardi Gras: purple, green, and gold. And the reason why purple in Purple Goldfish is an ode to New Orleans and Mardi Gras is that there's one word that comes from New Orleans that exemplifies this idea of going to do a little bit more, a little something extra, and that word is called lagniappe. Mark Twain once said that lagniappe was a word worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. And the idea of it dates all the way back to the 1800s. It's the idea that it's about going beyond the transaction for the business to do a little something extra to honor the relationship that they have with the customers that they serve. So I mentioned I started this project. I started to crowdsource examples. People would send me examples. I would write about them. I would get more examples that came in. And I mentioned I tried to find 1,001. What turned out, it took just over 2 years to collect all 1,001 examples. But what's interesting is I looked through literally hundreds of examples. You started to see the patterns of how you could do this, how you could plus up the experience. And it turns out that there's 10 ways that you can do this. And we're going to share kind of the two main categories. There are some which fall into what we call value. So this is what you do for the customers that you serve, and 5 that fall into a category of maintenance, right? What is it like to have to do business with you? How easy do you make it? How do you remove friction from the process? So if we said number 1 is the idea that little things can make a big difference, here's number 2, the second key. You need to find ways to add value to the experience that you provide. And the first type within value, I'm going to share a couple types, is what we call throw-ins. Now, throw-ins are the idea of doing a little something extra that gets added above and beyond the transaction. So if you've ever stayed at a DoubleTree hotel before, what's their throw-in? You get it right when you check into the hotel. It's the chocolate chip cookie. They've been doing it since the 1980s. It's part of the fabric of the brand. They've given away now over almost 500 million cookies. In fact, neat thing that they did back in April because of COVID, they actually put the recipe for DoubleTree cookies online. Little something extra. Individually wrapped, warm. It's that first welcome and great first impression, a little something extra thrown in. The second type in value I want to talk about is the idea of sampling. Now, sampling is something we think about that we do for maybe prospective customers to get them to become customers. But how I think smart brands leverage it for the customers that they already have to give them a little additional taste of what they can do for that customer. And it's a smart strategy because here's the deal. On average, the customers that we already are doing business with, on average, only know 20% of everything that we can do for them. These are the people that are already writing us a check, right? Each week or month or year, and they only know 20% of the entire 100% that we can do. Why wouldn't you give a little something extra? And I love this example. It comes from St. Paul, Minnesota. It's an ice cream store called Izzy's Ice Cream. And when you go to Izzy's and you buy a scoop of ice cream, they will let you sample an additional flavor for each scoop that you buy. So that they give you this little mini scoop on top of the scoop that you bought, and that little mini scoop is called the Izzy. So a great way for them to promote the additional flavors and get people interested about the ice cream. All right, we talked about little things can make a big difference. Number 2 key was figuring out ways to add value. Well, number 3 is how do we find ways to reduce maintenance and effort for the customers that we serve? How do we make it easier for them and remove some of that friction? And so there are really quickly 3 ways I want to talk about. The first is the idea of how do we do a little added service, right? So it may not be something physically that you give, but how do you do a little something extra that maybe makes it easier or adds value as part of the experience? And this example comes from SafeLight. So if anyone has had their windshield either repaired or replaced, SafeLight's probably the biggest company out there that's doing it. Well, if they come to repair your window, they've got this machine that they clamp onto your windshield, and it literally drills a hole into the windshield, and then they fill it with an epoxy resin. Now, it takes 10 minutes for that epoxy to cure and harden. So what the technician will do is go back to their van and typically grab glass cleaner and a vacuum. And while that epoxy is curing, they do the entire interior of the car. So now when you walk out, not only is your windshield perfectly, looks like it's new, the entire interior of your car is absolutely clean. So a memorable little extra and just an added service. Didn't cost them anything but the additional time to do that extra. The second type is what we call convenience. So how do you make your brand more convenient to do business with? This is a banking example. TD Bank stands for Toronto Dominion Bank. So many of their branches, because they want to be convenient, some are open to 8 o'clock at night during the week, but many of them are open 7 days a week. They want to be America's most convenient bank. So how do you find ways to be more convenient? I love this. Every day when they open the branch, they always open the doors 15 minutes earlier than the stated hours, and they actually don't lock the doors till 15 minutes after the stated time. They're building in the ability to welcome people in early that might get there early, or take care of somebody who maybe just got there a minute or two too late. The third type I want to talk about right before we go to questions and comments is this idea of waiting. So the more successful you are in business, waiting becomes inevitable. And how do you figure out ways that you can either reduce that waiting or maybe make that waiting a little bit more pleasurable? So I love this example. It's from Lexus. They take pride in the service experience. So when you take your car into Lexus, and I'm a proud Lexus owner, the waiting experience when you have your car serviced is like being in an airport executive lounge, right? Great Wi-Fi, food and drink, comfortable place to wait. And they're making that experience, if they can't reduce the time, at least they're making it a little bit more pleasurable for the customer. We've got time for maybe a few questions. I know we talked about typing that into the Q&A. I'm going to open that up here in a second, but feel free to type that in here. And then I've got a final story after we do questions and comments before I throw it back to wrap things up. So I'm opening the first one. All right, so the first question is this. is the purple goldfish concept used as a campaign, or is it something that you do all the time? So I think that's a great question. I think it lies at the heart of managing and creating expectation for the customers that you serve. So I tell people, you typically don't want to think about this as just a campaign methodology, meaning that you don't want to introduce something as a little extra, and then the next time that customer comes in, it's gone, right? That's the campaign methodology. It starts and it ends. So what most people do when they think about creating a purple goldfish is that it becomes part of the DNA of the brand. It's part of each and every experience. It's not just an over the top for one customer. It's a little thing that you do for all of the customers, and you consistently do it, and it becomes part of the overall experience. Great. Second question, what do you do when these elevated customer experiences become an expectation? So I think this is one of the challenges that we have, right? Here's the thing, the expectations of the customers that we serve, they don't stay just level. They certainly don't go down. They're always going up. So what happens when you do something in 2020 that's a little something extra, right? And it elevates the experience. But next year, that just becomes part of the overall expectation. Or, as an example, Lexus used to wash your car and vacuum it when you brought it in for service, right? When they first started doing that, that was a big thing because it was unique. Well, now if you go to a Ford dealership or if you go to Chrysler, odds on that probably they're gonna give your car a wash and maybe even vacuum it. When everyone starts to do it, it just becomes a baseline expectation. So what I find the best companies do, and I have about 70 companies that are in like a Hall of Fame, is that they're continuously looking at the experience that they provide, and they're constantly figuring out little things that they can do to layer on that experience to make it better. So it's not just one thing that they do that's a purple goldfish, but they might have a whole host of things that are different. Great. Good time for a couple more questions. Let's see. All right. How do you see impacts from the customer perspective when we talk robotic or AI? How can we better serve the customer with emerging technology in mind? So the fourth book in the series actually studied the idea of how do we leverage technology, data, and analytics to provide a better experience. So to answer your question, Sarah, I think it's an absolutely important part of experience going forward. In fact, I would say as we talk about expectation, most customers today expect when they're doing business with you that you as the company actually know who they are, right? That you're aware of their past history, and that you're going to be able to almost personalize the experience that you provide. So in Blue Goldfish, we talk about the idea of how can we talk about in essence, the 3 R's. How can you use technology, data, and analytics to drive the relationship? So how do you personalize the experience? How do you use somebody's data to eventually maybe even affect their behavior, change their behavior? The second R is the idea of being responsive. So how do you use both big data and little data to be more responsive? Again, to manage that waiting, to be more convenient when people are checking out. And then three, the third R is what we call readiness. And readiness is kind of the frontier. That's being predictive and literally understanding what a customer might need based on what you know about them when you interact with them. So I think one last thing as we end there, I think it's important to think about technology as it relates as a tool to improve the experience, but I think we can't overlook how that technology impacts the employee and the experience that they provide for the customer. And it's got to work for both the employee and the customer as we go forward. Many times I think, great. So how does this translate for, this is a question from Sherry, how does this translate for B2B? The examples that I share are mostly B2C, right? So a couple of things to share there is I actually have a deck in SlideShare, and I'll see if I can look that up at the end, Margaret, and I can put a link to that, where it talks about B2B examples from each of the types of purple goldfish. But here's the thing I tell most people is sometimes when you have 100,000 customers, it's hard to do a purple goldfish. It's hard to do those little things that go above and beyond the transaction. The nice thing about B2B is that you might only have 100 customers or 300 customers. And so it becomes more scalable on how you can do the little things to honor that relationship, to either add value or to reduce the maintenance. That's great. So really quickly, I want to just finish with very quickly a last story. And this weekend, if you have Disney Plus, I just watched the Disney Imagineering story. And they would tell you that Disneyland started back in 1955 when Walt had this vision. And then just 2 years after the park opened, Walt had an idea. And Walt's idea was this: he wanted to do a parade each day that went right down Main Street at Disney. Walt absolutely loved parades. And so it was going to cost Disney back then $350,000 to buy the floats, hire the people, and pull it off. Now, who freaked out when they heard that? The finance people freaked out. They immediately found Walt, they sat him down, and they tried to reason with him. And they said, Walt, don't do the parade. These people next month, when they come to the park, they're not going to miss the parade, right? Because what? They're not even expecting it. And Walt looked up at his accountants and he said, you know what? That's exactly why we need to do the parade. He said, here at Disney, we always need to give our customers more than what they expect. He said, if we don't, and they decide not to come back, he said it's going to cost us 10 times the amount of money to get them to come back to the park. What did they do in 1957? They did that parade down Main Street. And they just opened Shanghai a couple of years ago. What do they do there in the afternoon? It's become the signature thing that differentiates Disney from any other amusement park. And so Walt's mantra was simply this. His mantra was this: always exceed expectations. So much so that Walt had his own word for this. He called it plussing. And for Walt, plussing was an action. It was looking at the experience and figuring out ways that you can just add a little bit more to make it better, and then make it better on top of that. So I hope as we leave today, maybe you're thinking a little differently about the experience that you provide, that you believe that little things that you do can truly make a big difference, and that you're committed to finding ways to either add value or to reduce maintenance to make it easier for the customers that you serve. And I hope you're willing to ask yourself, what's our purple goldfish? Thank you for having me. And with that, I'll throw it back to you, Margaret.
Stan, thank you. Thank you so much. And especially for dealing with, while I was having some audio issues, taking all of the questions and comments on your own. I appreciate it so much. And thanks to a fantastic audience. Those were great questions you were submitting and always adding to enhance the enhanced discussion. If anyone would like to learn more from Stan, he's a member of the faculty of our mini MBA Customer-Centric Management. Program start dates and other details are available on the Executive Education section of the Business School website. If you're an RBS alumnus, I encourage you to proudly indicate so on your mini MBA applications so that you receive a generous discount. It's a friendly reminder to everyone listening that our virtual Lunch and Learn series takes place on Wednesdays at noon Eastern. We hope it's easy for you to remember because it's the middle of the week and the middle of the day, though we do have some coming up that are occasional exceptions to ensure that we're bringing you topics and presenters on a timely basis. For more information about our future webinars, you can always visit our webpage, business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. Since that's long, we also email it to you. Our exciting forthcoming schedule is a result of your great comments and suggestions. We encourage you to keep sharing your thoughts with us so the series can continue to meet your evolving needs. Please stay online very briefly, just a moment longer as today's webinar ends, because you'll immediately see a 3-question survey about today's events, and one of those questions is a free-form field to type in topics and/or speakers you'd like to see featured in the future. As I mentioned when our webinar began earlier, a link to the archived recording of this presentation will be shared via social media and emailed to registrants. It will also be on the Business Insights page of our website. And in closing, all of our webinars now have a component called the 1000 Laptop Challenge. Our students and their families have endured financial hardship since COVID-19 rocked all of our worlds. They quickly entered a remote learning environment that required technology, such as laptops, that many simply can't afford. Corporate sponsors, promotional partners, and individual contributors can help by donating to the 1000 Laptop Challenge Fund. Please watch for a follow-up email with more information about how you can be part of this important initiative and a link to the donations webpage. We appreciate your kind support. Thanks so much to Stan and our fantastic audience. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye for now.